How do you feel about Alex Karp as the CEO of the company?
Love it.
Do you feel his eccentricities add to the downside of the stock? Meaning, do you think investors don't like some of the quirks he has, and that is ultimately not good for shareholders in the short term or long term? Or do you think some of those quirks actually add to the mystique of the company, which make it an exciting? Like, he's not a Frank Slootman. He's not a typical operator.
Yeah, I think Karp is the person that you need for Palantir today. If you need somebody that, um, how do I put this? I think that from a an image perspective, it has hampered the speed at which Palantir could have been loved and adopted by Wall Street. But to me, that doesn't matter because I know in the long term, the products are going to truly be the thing that outshine. And I think Karp is the right person to get the products and the philosophy and the culture of the company in the way and manner that it has been kind of cultured to get to a place where it can be that generational, transformational company. I think if you had somebody like a Slootman, you would have focused specifically on Foundry and Gotham. You probably wouldn't have been able to create something like an AIP. I don't think you would have been able to create something like an Apollo. I don't think that. I think that you probably would get sales way faster if you had Slootman at the head of something. But would you have the longevity and the runway and ability to continue to innovate and add additional features to the product is kind of my fear. And so there's a give and take balance with all these things of truly listening and being philosophical about what's truly important, which is what can we do to make enterprises the most efficient and truly drive value for those organizations. And then you have somebody like a Slootman or somebody that's specifically focused only on sales, which is great if you're a mature business. But a company that's still truly in its infancy needs somebody like uh, a Jobs, a Karp, somebody that is very philosophical in manner to be like, no, this is why we're here. This is what the customer needs. This is what, that you're fighting for the customer versus you're both fighting for the customer, but in different ways, right?
Right.
I think Karp is fighting for the customer to make sure that they get the value that they need, versus a Slootman is fighting for the customer in terms of fighting to get them to purchase things from the company. And so I think right now, with where Foundry is, you need the former rather than the latter, and you need people to continue to talk to you, form those relationships, because at the end of the day, the customers, the enterprises are going to tell you what they need. And if you're just trying to sell them something, then they're going to borrow gobbledygook, and it's going to be the same. Not borrow, but buy gobbledygook, and in 3 to 5 years, another salesman's going to come along and steal them, right?
Right.
For their product. So
Speaking of Karp as a CEO, I want to get your take on his very controversial statement that was music to our ears as shareholders, maybe not music to other shareholders' ears, which is we don't have a pricing strategy for artificial intelligence. We are just going to capture the whole market. What is your kind of raw thoughts when the CEO of a company you're heavily invested in says that?
well, I know it got me fired up. I know it didn't fired up in a positive manner. I know it didn't get people fired up in the same way as I was. They were fired up in the what the hell sort of manner. So I think that AIP, just like Foundry, just like Gotham, just like Apollo, is going to have very different use cases. And it really honestly depends on what you're going to use it for. And if you're doing it for something that's very simple, you're probably not going to be a very big customer. But something like what I could potentially see AIP being with an undisclosed oil company, I foresee something like that being huge. The amount of times that when we're coming up with a project proposal or something like that, um, a commercial analyst on our finance team will ask me something rather simple. And a lot of times it's because one, they probably don't even have access to Foundry because they don't need it at the moment. And then two, it's because it requires a little bit of accuracy. I look at that things every day. They look at the commercial operating plans and the costs and the OpEx and the CapEx of things that are going on. And so I wouldn't be able to pull up the data. I'd have to ask them, right? So if you have the right tools that can access and have been set up by your teams to say, hey, Matt, how much is this well made? We're writing it into a financial memorandum, and we need to know so that we can give context appropriately for the executive signing. Then you don't need to bother me, and it allows me to focus on and continue to focus on things that are adding value to the organization rather than regurgitating information that I can find or they could find if they had the right ability to. And so that adds a whole new department of people that then would have access to Foundry or to AIP or something like that, which hasn't been used before. Now, it also depends on really just the use cases, right? I mean, some people might not really care about AIP, or they're just trying it out, or another piece of it that I think a lot of people don't recognize, and I think this is still the case with Gotham and Foundry today, is there's going to be some industries that are now excited because they want to get out on the AI train that haven't been involved before. And so you give it to them for free to lock them in, one, to learn about that particular industry, so that if you ever go to a different industry in the future, now you have the ability to kind of upsell them on different products, whether it's aeronauticals or energy or what have you. But I think it's something that it's a long-term game. You capture as much of the market share as you can. Who care if they're a profitable company? This, I'm going to say this, and hopefully this makes sense. They're a profitable company that now no longer needs the free cash flow to be able to survive because they have 2 point some billion dollars in the bank. They're a profitable company now where they're continue to add to that cash in the bank. They don't have debt. What's the easiest way to get market share ownership if you're not selling it for a price at all? If you're able to give it to as many people for as cheaply as you can, take the entire market, right? Get them into the infrastructure, because once you get onto Foundry and once you get onto Gotham, it's very hard. It's very sticky. So the true value is getting as much market share as possible. You get the customer count up, and just as we've seen, customers generally stay. The net dollar retention is generally, it might be small, 10, 20% a year, but if you give it to as many people as possible, you capture the market before anybody else does, before they get involved with Snowflake or anything like that. I mean, you're talking about a go-to-market strategy. What better strategy is that than to get them on the hook and then slowly say, well, we're actually gonna have to start charging you this year a little bit.
And the sales is kind of easy then, because you're like, hey, it's free, and who doesn't like free, right? And free after 18 months, then it's like a couple $100 million, and you're like, well, it's worth it.
And I think you'd be surprised if you listen to a lot of the talks that Karp gives. I think you'd be surprised at some of the clientele that he mentions, and I have a feeling that way more people have this software in their hands that's for free than you would probably give credit to or think. There's a lot of charities that have probably got it. There's a lot, and some of it might just be the philanthropic nature, but I think a lot of it is truly the aerial exposure, market share exposure aspect of things, and eventually they're going to turn on the drip. And I think there's a lot more companies that are in the, hey, let's invest in these companies, get them as partners, and then truly slowly move them to the expand and scale phase over time. And I think that is what Karp knows that a lot of people don't, is how free he's given it away. I'm sure he didn't charge for the COVID, the pandemic aspect of being. And I know plenty of people, like my brother-in-law works for a company, and I'm like, hey, just curious, do you guys use Palantir at all? He's like, you mean the company that we use to input all of our like pandemic numbers into and vaccine numbers and stuff into? I was like, that's the only thing you guys are using it for? He's like, yeah, I think we're gonna get rid of it like in a couple months. But I wouldn't be surprised if they eventually turned around and tried to potentially get their foot in the door in that particular organization. But think about how many different organizations they got their foot into. That was the database worldwide. So you don't think about it. It's like, I'm sure that the amount of clientels that they got, and same thing with Ukraine, right? A lot of people probably like, I don't know anything about Palantir. Weren't they the people that helped with the pandemic? Now they're in Ukraine. What's going on with that?
Right.
So it's that piece where you're continuing to build that rapport with the Western world to recognize these guys are on our side, huh? They're helping you through Ukraine. They're helping with the pandemic. These guys must be on our side. Must be a pretty good company. So I think that you haven't heard the last of it for sure. I honestly think that it's very much in its infancy, and that's kind of where I think the AWS analogy comes in. It's like a lot of people didn't really know about it, but you keep hearing about it, and you still don't really know what the hell it does. But eventually, it's going to catch on like wildfire in your entire company, if not the entire infrastructure of most enterprises in the U.S. If they're big enough, right, and they're focused enough around data and stuff of the like, will be running off of Palantir. I'm very convinced it huge market share of a lot of these companies in the next 20 years.